Welcome to our 8th Marjorie Dean Lecture. We're pleased that you could join us. I'm Stephen Solomon, the Marjorie Dean Professor and Director of the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at New York University. I'm also Director of the Master's Program in Business Economic Reporting, which is a sponsor of this event. Our thanks go today to the Marjorie Dean Financial Journalism Foundation in London for making these lectures possible. The foundation provides major support for 2 master's programs, the Business and Economic Reporting program here at NYU and a Financial Journalism program at City, University of London. I want to welcome students and faculty from both programs, as well as the trustees of the foundation, alumni, and other guests. These lectures, which began in 2014 with a talk by Paul Volcker, have been part of the foundation's ongoing commitment to support the education of business and financial journalists. It's so important that people entering the field have a deep understanding of the economics and finance that they're writing about. So these lectures are a very important way to build that foundation of knowledge. It's my honor to introduce the speaker for today. Professor Susan Athey is Economics of Technology professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She earned a bachelor's degree from Duke University and her PhD from Stanford. She has also taught at MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. She is a recipient of the John Bates Clark Medal. The American Economics Association awards the medal to the economist under 40 who has made the greatest contributions to thought and knowledge. She is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences. Professor Athey's research focuses on digitization, marketplace design, and the intersection of econometrics and machine learning. She developed strategies for using digital technology to help improve internet search engines, online advertising, and the news media, and works on the application of digital technology to social problems. She served as consulting chief economist at Microsoft for 6 years, and now serves on the boards of several companies, including Expedia and peer-to-peer companies like Lending Club, Rover, and Turo. She is the founding director of the Golub Capital Social Impact Lab at Stanford, which improves the process of innovation. She's also the associate director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, whose mission is to understand ways to use AI for social good. Welcome, Professor Athey.
Thanks so much. And it's wonderful to be here. And thanks everyone in the audience for your patience. It's always fun to have a little Zoom difficulty, 2.5 years into living with it. So today I want to talk about some of the work that I've been doing around using, as was stated in my introduction, I've been doing a lot of work around using technology and digitization for social impact. And so I want to speak about some of the work that I've been doing in my lab. So let me share my screen and take it away. And then I believe we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So let me get this going. So the Golub Capital Social Impact Lab is really the culmination, which I founded and run at Stanford GSB. It was really the culmination of bringing together the different parts of my research and kind of professional life for a particular goal. So as Stephen mentioned, I had been chief economist at Microsoft. I'd worked with a lot of for-profit tech companies, and I'd done a lot of research along the way that was complementary to that work. And then I had the idea that all of those innovations that I had seen and guided in the for-profit sector could be applied for social impact. And we also have these great resources at universities, which are young people who are really looking to learn and develop their skills. And so I could bring together the students and faculty and researchers that we have in the university setting to help translate some of the innovations for social impact and make the social sector more effective along the way. And one of the things that's important about digitization is that it allows measurement. And so as these social impact organizations get better at applying technology and measuring it, they also can help influence the whole ecosystem, because if you can measure effectiveness and demonstrate it, it can increase philanthropic and government investments in those areas because they have more confidence that they work. So one of the some of the themes that this lab is really an example of is basically moving from impact measurement to impact creation. So historically, there have been areas of economics and other social sciences that have really focused on just measuring the effect of a program. So let's measure the effect of class size on student attainment, or let's measure the effect of, mosquito nets on health outcomes. But in the digital world, there's really the opportunity and the necessity for the evaluator to be embedded in the system design and in the service delivery. Because if you're delivering services digitally, the measurement is actually part of the technology. You need code not just to deliver the services to people, but also to allow you to randomize who gets what. That helps you evaluate, being able to compare treatment to control, and you have to be collecting the data that's appropriate for measurement. So that kind of puts the researcher in the loop, if you like, of delivering the services. And then once that measurement is occurring, it helps the organization make itself better, and it also helps external parties understand the impact. So then in terms of the opportunity there, so we have an opportunity for measurement and evaluation, but we also just have the opportunity to deliver services for social impact very broadly. So what are some of the things that make digital services so useful for social impact? Well, one is that they can be scaled. So once you develop, if things are coming through software, once you've written the software, the marginal cost of serving in another person is very, very low. So that's great for philanthropy or government, because once you've built something, you can deliver it at scale. And a lot of times something that's developed in one context or for one country can actually be translated. A lot of the core technology and software can move over, and then the content can be customized for the context. A second thing is that you can personalize delivery to the beneficiaries. And so there's a lot of different aspects of personalization, and I'll talk about some of those today in examples. But we can get the right content to the right people at the right time at the right place, at the time that's convenient for you to receive the services. And that's really important because historically, we haven't really done a very good job of accommodating the time of the people receiving services. So if you're trying to get healthcare, you're going to need to show up and wait in line. If you want to get government services, you've got to drive somewhere.
Yeah, and I just emailed her.
Someone needs to
She
mute.
says it's not necessary, but thank you.
Andrea I think needs to mute. Can someone mute Andrea? Thanks. So you're really putting a lot of burden on people who are trying to receive services by making them go and get them. And that can be very costly for the poor, and it can also be costly for people in rural areas. You need a specialist for your child who's having a learning disability and you're in a rural area, you just don't have access to it. And so accessing those services is really difficult. And then finally, you can learn and change quickly. So once you're actually interacting with your target population, and you can see how you're doing and make changes to make it better iteratively. So that's basically a huge opportunity. We can basically build software and get it to people and make it better for them and make sure it's meeting their needs and incrementally improve it. And that creates an opportunity for philanthropy and also for universities to participate. And so it's no longer a one-time evaluation of impact. I have an idea and I'm going to go spend 2 years evaluating it. Instead, I'm making it better every day. And that's what's led to the massive success and impact, for good or for bad, of the whole tech sector. But we can try to turn that for good if we apply it for social impact problems. There's a lot of challenges, and social science plays much more of a role than you would think. One of the biggest challenges in implementing this is actually knowing when you've had impact and deciding what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. And that's really the social scientists' job, or the business people, the domain expert, rather than, it's not something that we teach people how to do in computer science class. You know, computer scientists are taught how to optimize something, but they weren't taught how to think about what you should be optimizing. And so that creates an ongoing role for people who really understand the context of the problem you're solving. So, I think about there being sort of a loop in the or a cycle of innovation, and it has multiple steps, and there's different specialists might be involved in different steps. So you might look out at historical data and do analytics to try to understand the magnitude of the problem, to try to understand who isn't being served and who isn't having good outcomes. Then you can come up with an idea, an innovation, and you have to prototype it and do some evaluation to understand, how impactful is it likely to be. Then you design an experiment where you can randomize treatment against control to see whether it actually works, and also for whom does it work. And finally, you analyze and improve analyze the data and use it to improve the product. So my lab has engagements with multiple organizations that take us through this kind of a cycle. And we've also created a lot of content so out of each of those engagements, we create content which we then share broadly. So we have new tutorials and notebooks and courses to help data scientists learn the techniques and social scientists learn the techniques. We have documents that help people do planning of experiments. And then we have software packages that serve needs along the way. So let me now show you a few examples of the types of projects we've been doing that bring together some of these ideas. So one of the places one of the things that has powered a lot of the tech companies are recommendation systems. You think of Netflix or something trying to get you the right movie, YouTube showing you just one more video, or Facebook or Instagram trying to show you things they think you'll be interested in. That same type of technology can be applied to try to help people be engaged in learning, in education and training. And the hypothesis is getting the right content for the individual is going to increase engagement. So to build a recommendation system, what you need is input. You need historical data on users' interactions with, say, a large set of items like stories and that they're reading. And the output would be predictions about how users would engage with items they haven't interacted before. And then you use that to promote content. So one of my lab's partners is a edtech company called Stones to Milestones in India. And what it does is it's an app that recommends stories for students to read. And this is particularly a problem for underprivileged youth because their parents may not be very good at reading English. And so it might be hard for the parents to actually guide this educational process, which learning to read has to take place at home. So this app will help help the students and the parents together navigate reading. If they don't have a lot of books, they can just keep reading stories that are shown in the app, and it in principle can help guide you through that process. It also has features like to read the stories aloud if the parents aren't able to help the student. So what the lab did is we looked at the historical data and first of all had to decide what's a good outcome, because they hadn't been doing this kind of optimization before. So this picture is showing sort of the user's journey through the funnel. When they open the app, then they might see a story, then they might start reading the story, and then they might complete the story. And so we put numbers on top of those outcomes in order to have an objective that we would try to quantitatively optimize for. And so you're going to get sort of more points if the student finishes the story, but you'll also get some points if the student thought it was interesting enough to get started for. And so we use this data and this objective to build a machine learning algorithm that would help figure out for each story, what are the hidden characteristics of the story? How can I describe the story in sort of what's called a low dimensional representation of the story? And I can also estimate the students' preferences for stories based on what they've finished in the past. And so we built this model and we implemented this. Was the first recommendation system. Previously, they had been hand curating the stories and all students were getting the same recommendations. And now the new system would be personalized and it would give students a story that the algorithm thinks would be beneficial for them, that would be something they would like. They would be likely to complete the story. And we also found that although we had labels, like this is about sports or animals or something else, those labels were not very predictive of what students would actually like. Maybe the labels were bad, or maybe that it's not really animals that makes the story interesting to a student. It's something else about the story that hadn't been categorized. And so then we helped them figure out how to design and implement an A/B test to evaluate the effectiveness of this new algorithm, the recommendation system compared to the kind of hand curated thing. And so these orange bars are, we implemented only in part of the app. It was something that was called the recommended stories part of the app. And we found, very large improvements in engagement. So the students were reading a lot more stories, spending a lot more time reading stories and reading more stories and finishing more stories. And then the orange bars show how that looks overall, because across the app as a whole, because the students might also be taking time away from other parts of the app. And so you could just have a net zero. They spend more time in one part of the app, but less time in others. But we found that overall, the students' engagement with the app was also increasing. So they were shifting more of their time to this part of the app because it was working better for them, but that wasn't just substituting away from other parts. They were overall were reading more. So this was an example of how getting the right information to the right people at the right time would improve outcomes. So now I want to talk about another project which was more complicated. And this partnership was with the World Bank and a hospital in Cameroon, where we were trying to help people make decisions, help women make decisions about contraceptive choice. And so this project is really about a particular type of digitization and use of digital tools for impact, which is helping workers provide better services. And so in particular, there's a category of things where a human is providing counseling to someone. And it could be, we're going to look at a nurse in a hospital providing counseling to patients about what contraceptives to take. But there are many other applications where you have a human providing advice, whether it's a high school counselor helping you choose about colleges, whether it's your advisor helping you choose courses in university, whether it's a government person helping someone who's been laid off figure out where to apply for new jobs. All of these are applications where there's a human helping another human. But the expert, the human counselor, may themselves not have all of the information and may have it hard. The human brain may not be perfect at knowing everything about all of the options and presenting them effectively and in a customized way to the person that they're trying to counsel. They might end up giving one size fits all advice, but not actually adjusting to the specific circumstances of the person. So this is a place where technology can come in. We can have the human counselor can be assisted by technology in a way that can then lead to the overall advice being more customized and also easier to consume for the consumer, for the person being counseled. So that's our goal here. We're going to talk about building a tablet application that helps the nurses guide the patients. And so that's going to potentially help the workers and service providers be more productive, capable. It can also make sure they're high quality and also make sure that they comply. You might have, and we worry about this with current public health problems as well. What if the nurse has superstitions and doesn't believe in vaccinations? Or what if the nurse, doesn't believe in some aspects of modern medicine, or they believe rumors or misinformation? So they might pass that on to their patients. So we can make sure that people comply with best practices and comply with how they've been trained. So the last thing that we want to think about, though, there's, of course, when you're designing this type of application, there are many, many permutations of that. And so it can be hard to iterate and learn fast enough. And so I'm also going to show how we use adaptive experiments in order to learn and make this better, come up with the best system. So the application here is in Cameroon, where patients come in and they're going to be counseled about contraception. And there's two kinds of contraception, roughly: long-acting reversible contraceptions. So this might be the IUD or the implant, And those long-acting reversible contraceptives tend to be much more effective in preventing pregnancy, especially in a developing country where physical access as well as financial constraints can get in the way. So if someone takes short-acting contraceptives like oral contraception, like pill, they have to keep taking the pill, and they have to keep going and getting it refilled, and so that can create impediments. People can forget, and you can have lack of compliance with. I mean, it's somebody's intending to do this, but they don't actually follow through with their own intentions. So generally, long-acting contraceptives are much more effective. And when we started this project, we actually thought that a lot of the impact might be to help people understand their options and make sure that they can understand that if they got a long-acting contraceptive, you would include in the initial when you get it initially, that you could get it out for free at any time you wanted, but also for people to understand the costs and benefits of those things. Now, it turned out that actually most people who were coming in for counseling were just leaving without any contraceptives at all. And there was the second hypothesis was that cost might be an issue. So what we found was actually switching among contraceptives wasn't as big a problem as just the overall barriers in terms of cost to get people to adopt these things, and also the people to know about them at all. So here's the hospital we worked with in Cameroon. We worked with directly with the hospital, and this was again like orchestrated by the World Bank. There was actually a multi-year project that involved a lot of people on the ground, a lot of local nurses to understand what the problem was, and then to design this tablet application. So I'm just going to pick up at the point that the tablet application exists. And what's going to happen is the patient comes in, and the app will guide the counselor through a needs assessment with the woman. So it'll ask them different questions about, do they want to have another child? Do they want to have another child in the next year? And what are their concerns? Are they concerned about side effects? Are they concerned about weight gain? Are they concerned about how they can reverse it, or how difficult it is to reverse it? What are the things they're worried about? So they'll go through this this needs assessment, and in our project, we're going to focus on people between 15 and 49 who wanted to wait at least 12 months before their next pregnancy. For those people, the provider and clients will discuss different contraceptive methods, and the app will guide the nurse regarding how to structure the method choice discussion, as well as how much to charge. All of that comes out of the app. And so in this particular setting, it wasn't an option for us to just have some people get the tablet and some people not get the tablet. So what we did in our experiment is we compared the tablet, in one case, trying to kind of replicate what was happening before we had the tablet at all. And that's what we call individual decision-making. And in the individual decision-making, they do a quick overview of the different options in random order, and then the patient will prioritize what to discuss. They'll say, which one would you like to talk about first? And the patient chooses what they want to talk about. So the patient say, I want to talk about the pill. In the shared decision-making treatment, the app is actually going to prioritize the methods to best match what the woman said that she wanted based on her overall desires. So not her desire for a specific contraceptive method, but what are her goals in terms of, and what are her concerns? So it's a recommendation of what the app thinks the woman would like best based on what she's told us. And in that one, in the shared decision-making, what happens is the app will prioritize them, and you'll tell the woman, we're going to go through these in the order that the app thinks is best. And so you're going to go have a structured conversation. You can always say, no, I don't like that. Let's go to the next one. But the key is the woman is told that these are ranked in order of what we think would be best for you. So just to see what happens there in these orders, the IUD and implant are most often in position 1 and position 2 of the list. So these numbers show what fraction of the time each method was in each ranking of the list. But there are times the pill is in the first position 5% of the time, and it's in the second position 25% of the time. And that even though it's less effective, that they would end up in those positions given the woman's medical history or her concerns. And so it's not the case that this is always putting the IUD and implant at the top. Then we ran a randomized experiment where we randomized both the method of decision making side by side or the shared decision making versus the side by side, which is the individual decision making. And so we're going to vary all of those things. And so the full price for the IUD and implant would be about $7. And then we look at several other prices, half off, 3/4 off, all the way down to free. And so this pilot is going to help us understand what's going on. There's actually a little bit more complexity here because some people come in and they say, I just want something. I have a method in mind, like I want the pill. And then the nurse will ask them, are you willing to consider other methods? They might say no. So the people who come in with a method in mind we'll call these the method in mind people. They're not randomized into a counseling style, but we're still going to randomize their prices. While under the counseling, the people who are willing to have counseling, those are going to be randomized on both prices as well as how the app makes the recommendations. We lost a little time at the beginning, so let me go a little quickly here. We looked at whether people liked the app or felt like they were pushed, and there was actually no negative effects on people's satisfaction with their counseling experience from this app. We also looked at how many methods were ultimately discussed. And interestingly, the one where the shared decision-making, where the app says we're going to go in rank order, women actually discussed more methods in that setting. And so you can interpret that maybe as that, gosh, like this thing is listening to me. It has recommendations. I want to hear their recommendations. While if you're just kind of guessing, maybe people sort of feel frustrated and give up and just stop after they've heard about one method. So this chart, there's a lot going on in it, but this summarizes the results of our initial purely randomized trial. And because we had so many things going on, we have prices changing as well as counseling methods changing. In this picture, we simplify and we just look at full price versus all of the discounts. So the red bars are full price and the blue bars are discounted price. And then on the y-axis is the fraction of the clients who adopted a long-acting reversible contraceptive. And so what we first see looking at the method in mind people, none of these people didn't get counseling, but they did see randomized prices. And what we see is the people who got a discount, so they didn't pay the full $7, but they might have been $3.50 down to free, adopted the long-acting reversible contraceptives much more, that's the blue bar, than the red bar under method in mind didn't adopt as frequently. So this is already showing that at roughly $4 a patient, you can increase adoption basically by 50%. You can 20 percentage points. So this is incredibly cost effective. And remember, these are all women who said they did not want a pregnancy in the next year. So the discounts are really effective, and we can get a very precise estimates of the magnitudes as well. This is a really big increase. And we see that most of that, it's not coming from people switching from short acting to long acting. All of that increase is coming actually from people just going from not taking a contraceptive at all to taking one. Then moving over to the right, we can look at the impact of the counseling style. And so that's IDM, that's kind of the old fashioned way, the women's prioritized, versus the shared decision making, which is where the app does the prioritization. And we see that that the bars are higher under SDM than under IDM, which is showing that it's generally the shared decision making is leading to higher adoption of the long-acting reversible contraceptives. But a second thing that's kind of interesting is that the red and blue bars are the same height under shared decision making. And what that means is that the prices are not making a difference once the advanced counseling app is used. And so the interpretation there would be that if people have information and it's customized to them, then they actually are convinced that they want to adopt the contraceptive, and they don't actually need a discount to get them over the edge. While for the people where the women are suggesting the order in which to discuss the contraceptives, the prices make a really big difference. And so the discounts actually have a huge effect for under the IDM part. The blue bar 0.285 is much bigger than the red bar 0.114 in terms of the share of people doing this take up. So this experiment then can be used to first show that both things, the discounts and the tablet application, can be really important, and that they're going to very much increase adoption. So then what we did is we did what's called an adaptive experiment. And I'm just going to be able to really give you a very high level overview of what that does. What we try to do is optimize an objective where we think about money. There is a cost of money. So we worry about how much we're spending. And then we also worry about the failure rate of the application. So we come up with a quantitative objective that's coming from external sources about how costly, how much money do we have, basically what's the budget constraint, and what is the benefits of the different contraceptives in terms of failure rates. And then we develop a machine learning algorithm that's going to try to adaptively learn how to optimize the discounts as well as the counseling methods to achieve this objective. And relative to a standard A/B test, this is going to be better for the patients, because as soon as we start learning that something isn't working, like that full price is not efficient, it's cost effective to give people discounts in terms of the failure rate you generate, the algorithm is going to stop giving people full price. And if the side-by-side individual decision-making, the old-fashioned decision-making isn't working as well, the algorithm will stop giving that to patients. And so it's going to try to learn what's best, but then as quickly as possible, start giving the patients the thing that works the best. But while also preserving the ability to, after the experiment, to evaluate the benefits of the policy. So we have this learning phase, and this this tree here is showing what the machine learning algorithm has determined in terms of the personalized policy at the end of the pilot phase, which I just showed you, before the adaptive experiment begins. So already with the initial data, we see that it's useful to target subsidies in particular ways. And we also see that the shared decision-making, the modern app, was already looking good at the end of the pilot phase. And so we can see that different people, different groups, depending on your age and whether you just had a baby, will get different discounts. And so groups A and D are going to be at the end of the pilot phase, we felt like they should get contraceptives for free. But some of these other groups, medium-aged women who hadn't had a recent baby, were going to be charged higher prices, taking into account the budget constraint. Then during the experiment, what we do is we start allocating people uniformly. But as we start figuring out, over here on the right, this is just a hypothetical illustration of how this works. But if treatment 1C is looking better, we start putting more people into the treatment 1 group. And so on the left, you would increase the probability assigned to the good, what's looking like the good treatment. And there's more units assigned to the good treatments and less to the bad treatments. And you keep going through the experiment, and by the end, you've gathered lots and lots of data about the thing that's working, and you also understand very precisely how good it is, but you don't gather as much data about things that aren't working. And so this picture shows during the phases of the experiment, there's all these different treatment arms. The different colors are treatment arms, and the y-axis are the treatment assignments. And so this is showing through the experiment, arms start winning. So for example, this gold arm is free contraceptives and the shared decision-making. And for the young women, that starts to pull ahead and get most of the treatment assignment by the end of the experiment. And so at the end, we find that taking into account budgets, it's still cost effective to give both of the middle groups the 2,000 discount, and we shouldn't be charging anybody full price. And by the end, we also confirm that this shared decision-making is the best counseling method. Then by the very end, we've gathered a lot of data, And we basically can compare the benefits of the overall personalized policy. So the overall system of allocating women to discounts and to counseling styles. And we can compare that to a control where people didn't get discounts and they got the old counseling method. And we can see that the uptake of contraceptives is almost twice as high with the policy with the winning policy versus the control. And we also have very precise estimates, a low standard error. That means we really understand very precisely how many people are going to take up contraceptives under this new policy, which can help policymakers predict the costs and understand the benefits and be able to demonstrate them. And this in turn would be used to justify scaling up the tablet application. And then the beautiful thing about this is this tablet application itself is designed to be scalable. It was co-developed with nurses. It's a digital tablet. So all you need is enough tablets to cover the number of nurses you have on the shift in the hospital. The software is free. And once they're trained to use the software, then they can go out and use that for counseling. And that can be scaled to many, many hospitals and thus many, many patients. And then the discounts, of course, the discounts cost money. So there's a cost per woman, but we can also go to the policymakers and say, look, if you do give these subsidies, it really will increase the number of people adopting. And we've demonstrated that. So even though it's expensive, you should put the money in because you will get an outcome. It's not just subsidizing people, but you get the same amount of contraceptive uptake anyways. The subsidies actually really affect behavior. So, and now what we're doing is we're collecting data on longer term treatments, treatment effects. So we're looking at people a year later. Did it actually reduce unwanted pregnancies? Did people not like what they got and come back and switch? How did they deal with side effects? So we're going to be following up the patients. This experiment that I just described is just ending. In fact, these aren't the final results. We're still collecting data, but it's almost done. And then we'll show those conclusions. So in summary, for this project, we found that subsidies and decision-making aids have a very large effect. These are really, really large magnitudes, and these cost savings target subsidies at the most vulnerable, people who would walk out without contraceptives if you didn't give them the subsidies. And by running this adaptive experiment, we were able to balance these goals of learning about good policies and getting precise evidence that this works so that people are willing to spend money to scale it, but also maximizing the benefits of the people in the experiment. So as soon as we're learning what's working, we're putting more and more people into the good treatment arms. Now, this was a very complex project. It took a lot of time, and there's a lot of statistics hiding in the background of all of this. But in this case, we feel like this was beneficial, and this is one of the first applications the World Bank has done of this type of experiment. So we're also hoping it's going to be a case study for other projects in the future. And we also think this domain area of using things like tablet applications to help service providers do a better job providing services has a lot of upside potential. So let me stop there, and I'll be happy to take questions. And I think, let's see, we have it. There's a Q&A function, I think, and I've got that open also, so I can keep my eyes on those if anybody wants to type questions.
Yeah, Professor Athey, thank you very much. The students have prepared questions, but I might want to ask the first one here, because you ended by saying that there might be other applications that come out of this work. You're on the boards of a number of companies, you've consulted with others, and I was wondering, how might other companies use this to work with potential customers and anything like that?
Yeah, so there are already a lot of applications of this type of thing in the private sector, but they're kind of, they're sort of boring applications. So like customer service agents have a guided script that helps them do a better job serving their customers. And of course, we all have tons of frustrations. You think it's really not there yet. And that's right, it's not there yet. So the private sector is also kind of co-innovating along these pathways, but we have seen a lot of improvement in the ability to, find out the information about the customer more quickly, ask the right questions, and be able to deal with your particular circumstances. And so, in the customer service application, behind the scenes, even though it might still feel horrible, the companies are block and tackling. They're looking at what is the most common problem that people are not getting resolved quickly. And then they're trying to figure out how to make that better with technology. And they're just going down the list and trying to fix them sort of one at a time. So, and there is actual improvement on the back end, even if you can't see it as a customer. And so I think so in the private sector, also things like trying to help, train workers. So suppose you have someone who used to go through a really long training course to learn a specialized repair. Now, if you have a tablet application they can bring with them, they can get the manuals, they can get the guidance, they can get a little tutorial. Of course, the personal version of that is watching a YouTube video to help put together something instead of following the instruction manual that came with the product. And I'm sure we all did that during the pandemic when we were all ordering lots of stuff. So this idea of like bringing really customized information to the person. But of course, when you go to YouTube, you have to look at it and you get like 50 videos. You don't know which ones are good and which ones are bad. And you have to sit through ads, and some they go too slow, they go too fast. While if we have something that's really customized for the problem, we can do a much, much better job of getting people exactly the information that they need.
Okay, great. So I'm going to call on some of the students, and I'll just say in advance that they read widely in your papers and stuff. So some of the questions will be on other subjects that you've written about. So
happy to.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. So Lisa, are you available?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Professor Solomon. Can you all hear me? Just confirming.
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for the lecture, Professor Athey, and all your insights. I'm Lisa Renaud. I'm a student in the Business and Economic Reporting Master's program at NYU. And my question revolves around you speaking of artificial intelligence having imposed both challenges and opportunities for society. But what about threats? We've heard many industry leaders have expressed concern that AI may outsmart humans at some point and even in the near future. Like, for example, Mo Gaudat, the former chief business officer of Google X, the company's innovation lab. And I'm wondering, how can we make sure we design AI in a way that works for rather than against us?
Yeah, so part of the motivation for me founding the specific lab, and then my lab relates to this larger institute, which I was a founding associate director of, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. Both of those institutions are really founded to, their whole purpose is to really address your question. So the problems have been written out very widely, and let me not just repeat them. I think you're all aware of the very large number of problems and risks. So my question was, though, are we just going to sit around in rooms and complain about it, which I did for too many years and listened to for too many years? Or are we going to do something about it? So what can we do? There are many things we can do. Studying them, defining best practices, identifying problems, actually writing down what the most likely unintended consequences would be for each type of technology. Those are crucially important, and that's some of the work that we're doing at Stanford. But my concern, especially several years ago, especially, was that a lot of the ethicists and others that were writing about this and thinking about it really didn't understand the technologies they were writing about. They didn't understand their opportunities and limits, and therefore they got worried about the wrong things. So, that you're going to have general artificial intelligence. Some people think that, but most experts don't think that's happening anytime soon. Because basically AI right now is a lot of pattern recognition, but it's really, really, really good pattern recognition. So once you understand the technologies, you can better focus in on what's actually important. But how do you understand them if they're all sitting inside of Google or Facebook or whatever? You won't even know what's going on. You just read about it in the newspaper. And so one way to really make sure that we understand is to take social impact applications and actually go and do them. and in the path, bring together the ethicists and the social scientists and the people who really understand the context. And along the way, when you're paying a lot of attention to those problems, you will identify them. And then at the end of it, you will also develop the best practices for mitigating risks and solving problems. And this isn't the only thing to do, but I believe that only when people really engage with the technology deeply can they fully understand both the benefits and the risks. So by developing all of these social impact applications, also in an environment where people agree to publish, like I can publish the algorithm I used because I developed it for them for free. And that was the exchange, that they get the algorithm, but we're going to publish about it. We're going to share our learnings broadly. Then we are able to create the situation where then lots of people can study it and work on it. So that's just, I'm not saying that's the only thing to do. Our institute is doing many, many things in parallel across disciplines. But one of the things I think that we can do about it is to really develop these. And the same as government uses them. And if we do it very carefully, we'll develop expertise, and that will also make the government better at guiding and regulating. Of course, that assumes a beneficial government. If your government is not beneficial, this is very dangerous, and that's a whole nother conversation that that is super important to have.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Erica, I think you have a question about carbon dioxide removal.
Yes. Hi, Professor Athey. Thank you so much for the lecture. My question is more about like the carbon dioxide removal market that you proposed. You argue that for this market to prosper, eventually governments will have to step in, invest in the technology and regulations themselves. And I was wondering if this initiative will have to come from developed economies or is also viable in developing economies, and how to integrate like developing economies in this new market, especially like considering that usually these countries are the first and most impacted by the outcomes of climate change.
Yeah, well, so I didn't actually get a chance to talk about it today. So let me just give some context. So I talked today about technology. My lab has actually two prongs. One is what we call market shaping, or trying to affect the incentives for different kinds of technology adoption. And the other piece is developing technology that can also be measured. And of course, these things go together because it's hard to create incentives for something beneficial if you can't measure its effect. So one of the big projects I have now is trying to do market shaping for climate. And that actually came through, we had done a previous advanced market commitment project around the COVID vaccines. We advised a lot of governments on how much to procure and how to design those procurements to try to make sure that we got the vaccines as quickly as possible, and that firms invested even when it was very risky at the very earliest stage. And we took those learnings over to climate. And the problem with something like carbon removal is that the companies that might create carbon removal services don't really have a real customer. So generally, climate services, they're purchased by governments and they're purchased by companies either because regulation tells them they have to meet net zero, or just because they think it's a good idea. So instead, like if I'm selling, widgets, I can predict how much people are going to need widgets in the future and how much they're willing to pay for it. But how do I know how much philanthropists are going to be willing to spend on climate? Like the demand is just based on preferences, like citizen preferences, or what countries vote on, and it could go away at any moment. So that really hurts investment incentives globally. So the idea of the advanced market commitment is to have people who were planning to invest anyways actually formally commit that they will purchase, in this case, carbon removal, which is basically permanently removing carbon from our atmosphere in the future if it meets certain specifications. And so by formally committing that money, that motivates investors to give the money to startups and researchers to actually create the carbon removal services and technology. So that's kind of the idea. And so we recently announced, I'm an advisor for this, for the organization that's done this, and it was led by Stripe Climate, and they created a new fund called the Frontier Fund. And that fund raised $925 million. So that was really exciting. We just announced it. And it's in the, and that was pledged to purchase carbon removal. Now, if that technology gets to be more cost efficient, then that will be used globally. So there's basically, you can think of there being a cost curve. Like right now, it's way too expensive. Like people can take carbon out of the atmosphere, but they can only take a tiny amount and it's really expensive. So if the idea of that $1 billion is that it will get people down the learning curve to make it cost effective to be used globally.
There's another question on carbon removal, and Shelby, do you want to ask that?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Professor Athey. I've really enjoyed the conversation today and learning about your research. So the question that I had to do also with your carbon research, as I found that really fascinating. And I was just noticing that you had kind of mentioned that there were a lot of startups who were performing this work and could be perhaps better incentivized to perform this work. But then on the other side, you have the already big players in innovation, like the Elon Musks of the world. And so I wanted to know kind of where you think the next big innovation in carbon removal is going to come from. Is it going to come from these big players who already have lots of money? Is it going to come from a small startup? And if so, are there any particular startups that you feel are doing really exciting work?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the underlying science, so let me not like kind of pick winners there, because basically I'm just filtering the views of other experts. And there's a couple of teams that have been put together that are evaluating, that have written reports and so on. So I would just refer you, like the Frontier page has links to some of the ones that they've done really careful diligence on. In terms of the first part, where it's going to come from, basically, like right now, it's very nascent. As of like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, basically nobody really believed this was ever going to work, or wouldn't come at scale. So basically, there was almost no money going into it, and so it's just been a very small number of years where firms have actually gotten enough financing to really start exploring whether these things can be commercially produced. So whether it's done inside a big company or from a startup, the projects themselves are small. I mean, you just can't do them. You don't even know how to do them at large scale. And the reason the timing was right now for the advanced market commitment was that, it's not that hard to get some seed money to somebody throw you a little bit of money to do like science experiments and prototypes. But the step of going to build a factory, that requires real capital. And the kind of people who put up capital, whether it's inside a big company or external investors, you actually have to do some kind of ROI calculation if you're talking about putting, tens of millions of dollars down for infrastructure that really isn't repurposed that very well repurposed. So whichever way you look, you have to start doing some financial calculations at the point that you go up to scale. And it's at that point that that people are looking at the math of, is anybody going to buy this on the other end? And I should say that's also the case for vaccines. You might have thought it's sort of obvious people are going to buy vaccines. Of course they're going to buy vaccines. But then, actually, well, first of all, like maybe people didn't want vaccines as much as we thought they would. And also, if you have a vaccine that's medium good and somebody else has a vaccine that's better, maybe nobody will buy your vaccine. Or maybe, the pandemic just ends. So when the firms were deciding whether to put in, hundreds of millions of dollars to create large scale manufacturing capacity, they did perceive big risks. Like they might build this factory and it's for nothing. And of course, you can't build a factory from scratch. You're actually repurposing a factory that was useful for something else. So it's a really big decision for firms. So having these advanced commitments where they knew that, if they met certain criteria, they would be able to sell the doses, really helped people make those big capital allocations. So so sometimes the drug company will say, oh, well, we weren't really thinking about profits. We were just doing the research. That's true at the research phase. But when you go to put down tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, the finance people are always involved. And they're looking at the numbers, and there's always a margin. It could be bigger, it could go faster. And so the finances come in to making that happen. And that's where the problem really lies. That's where the types of incentives that I'm talking about really make a big difference. It's like getting you from the lab through the expensive part when there's a ton of risk on the other side. And if you just think about the risk, if you think something has, say, a 25% chance of paying off, then the benefits, have to be 4 times as big to justify the investment. If you can reduce that uncertainty and say, it's just like execution risk, but if you can build the factory and it runs, then you will find somebody on the other side. Then the benefits can be much smaller in order to justify the same investment. So if you're trying to get risky investment to come through, giving people certainty makes a really big difference in how much investment you get. And that's going to be true inside a big firm or for startups.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Prarthana has another question about green technology. And if anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to you in a few minutes. Prarthana?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your lecture, Professor Athey. So my question was just about green technology and kind of scaling it up and its adoption in general. And I've noticed that there's a wide difference between how some of the climate sensitive technology companies are able to adopt and I guess effect change compared to other companies whose core business doesn't entirely concern or like focus on the environment in particular. So my question is, how could such companies be involved in a market such as carbon removal, and what is kind of the appeal to companies that aren't in the environment space to adopt such practices?
That's a great question, and I think at some level, why are companies doing this? Like, why was Stripe involved in this? Why are big tech companies playing a role in this space, and why isn't it government? And actually, it really should be government. Like this actually should all be led by government. It makes sense for that to be the case. But governments are risk averse. You'd be shocked. I was running around at early stage of the pandemic trying to convince governments to, like in April, May of 2020, to June, trying to tell them, hey, you should spend money now to expand our manufacturing capacity so everybody can get vaccines quickly. And governments were surprisingly risk averse because they're really worried about spending money on something and then getting accused of wasting money. So that's and sometimes they're not thinking as hard about the upside. And so because something like carbon removal is a little controversial, it's young, it's not well established, they're worried that they'll make a program and the money will just get wasted. So in this case, if the private sector is able to prototype such a program, show that it works, show that it's not wasting money, demonstrate like, what are the parameters of this? How did they write the contracts? How did they do this so people couldn't just take the money and run, right? It's surprisingly important to have all of those details tested. That was another problem with the COVID vaccines too. People writing contracts that they'd never written before. And that just takes 2 months because the lawyers always take 2 months. And people have to think through, is the contract well designed? So in this case, like having this prototype, we think will help get the government to put more money in. In terms of why the tech companies are doing it, I think they are doing it, but because they view it as a social responsibility. They view themselves as leaders, and their employees also really demand it. And so they're kind of stepping into this kind of public role because they can. And they also can do some sort of thought leadership as well. It's an opportunity. It's part of their corporate responsibility mandate. But you might think they would stick closer to what they knew, but there's a bit of a vacuum here, and people think it's so urgent and so important that they're going into that as as a way to lead.
Okay. You mentioned vaccine development. a bit earlier, and Cole Horton has a question about that.
Thanks, Professor Solomon, and thank you, Professor Athey, for speaking with us today. I read your recent interview with NPR where you spoke about jolting the market for carbon removal into existence in a similar fashion to the development of the pneumococcal vaccine market in low-income countries in, I believe, the early 2000s. And so I was wondering, outside of vaccine development and carbon purchases, are there other underfunded social or environmental issues that you think could be addressed in part through the creation of artificial markets?
Well, so that was actually the initial idea for my lab, was that we would find digital technologies that worked, and then once their efficacy was demonstrated, that we would create these types of artificial markets. So you could imagine, helping, like going to a poor country and subsidizing the tablet applications for the nurses. And at that point, once you had a study and it was demonstrated, then it might be the World Bank, it might coordinate it, it might be a philanthropist, and then you could say, hey, we've got this product. It costs, X amount per nurse. Like if you cover the training of the nurse, we'll subsidize the tablets. But the key precursor to that is you have to have something that works. And so I originally went out and said, oh, let's look at all those great digital technologies that have great evidence that they work for the poor, and we'll start designing these advanced market commitments. But then unfortunately, there weren't enough of those that had really been shown to work at scale. And so then we got more deeply into the actual creation and the R&D. You could have imagined I wouldn't personally be doing the R&D. I would just be picking up other people's R&D. But I realized that in the digital tech for impact space, we were still more in the R&D phase. And so we're creating that. And direct funding works very well for the early stages of R&D, which is kind of what we're doing. But if you're pushing and pulling at the same time, you're likely to get the outcome. I think generally education has a lot of potential, but it has to be done right. You have to figure out how this technology is going to interface with the humans. And that's actually a big theme of our Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Lab, Institute at Stanford as well, is like, it's not just the tech, it's how does the tech interface with humans that really makes it work. So bottom line is, we're trying to find these and create them. I think in 5 years, my hope would be that there would be lots of these opportunities and that we would be able to go get them. A few other things we're thinking about are trying, like say, clean steel. There's a bunch of products that are made in a very dirty way. Cement and steel are two really big ones, but there's no market for clean steel. There's just a market for steel. So what could we do to create a market for clean steel? And that would involve consumer preferences, standards, and some of this getting down the learning curve that we also see in carbon removal.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of the hour, so there'll be one more question from the call, who's interested on internet news consumption. Nicole there? Maybe not. Well, let me ask the last question then. Professor Athey, you've been involved in these peer-to-peer companies, Lending Club, Rover, and so forth. Where does that market look like it's going? Are there other products that you would expect in the future that would be subject to the same kind of peer-to-peer lending or leasing or whatever?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about the lending actually was that was one that started out peer-to-peer, but it actually evolved into something a little bit different where large investors were buying loans, and then ultimately Lending Club acquired a bank. And so now it's also people's deposits are funding loans, which is what banks do. Basically, you don't always think about that as a consumer, but banks take people's deposits and then use them to fund mortgages and loans and things like that. So sometimes, and I think the reason that evolved in that way is that there's a lot of efficiency to having larger organizations be the supply side of the loan. But things like Rover and Turo they tend to evolve into small businesses. And sometimes they're individual small businesses, individual entrepreneurs, and sometimes they're literally small businesses. So if you think about everything from eBay to Airbnb and so on, they start out as like, I'm an individual and I'm renting a room, but they evolve into a property manager who might manage 5 houses or 10 houses or 20 houses or maybe 100 houses. And one reason it evolves that way is that those slightly more professional service providers often provide better service and it's more efficient. You get good at things like cleaning up and answering emails and, taking pictures and all that stuff. There's a lot of there's some small scale economies in doing that, but you don't need every vacation house in America to be owned by the same person. So you get what these platforms enable is sort of a small business basically to be efficient. And, of course, we had property managers before you had Airbnb and Vrbo and so on, but those property managers had a hard time finding customers. They had to do marketing. They had to figure out how to take payments. They had to figure out how to get trust. You used to have to like mail a check for your vacation house. And, who knows if the person's scamming you, and people did scam. And so, what the platforms do is they allow the service provider to create a reputation and acquire consumers and take payments and have safety and guarantees in a very cost efficient way. But then they let the service providers, figure out what are the good vacation houses and how to fix them up and what they should look like and, what the really important local characteristics are. And so that really creates the opportunity for lots of these small businesses. And so I think there are many places where that could happen. And it would be exactly the places where, there's individual service providers, whether it's home contractors, there's marketplaces for those, where, they're not really good at running businesses. They're just good at providing services, and it enables them to run a more efficient business. A lot of our MBA students are interested in marketplaces, and they're still cropping up. I got a camper van during the pandemic, and, there's a marketplace for people to rent out their, wilderness property for you to go camping on it. Or like farmers rent out space on their farm, and you can, I took my kids camping on a horse farm, and then they go feed the horses, so these places where people are able to utilize these underutilized resources, and there totally were not enough campgrounds. Like there were huge waiting lists for campgrounds. You couldn't get on the campgrounds. You have to wake up in the crack of dawn to make a reservation 6 months ahead. So these marketplaces are filling in these needs. One other really interesting thing that happened was like during the pandemic, there were no rental cars because the car fleets had gotten rid of them. And then there were supply shortages. They couldn't make enough cars to fill them back out again. So like with Turo, people put their cars in Hawaii. There were all these news stories where people figured out that the rental cars were going for $600 a night. So someone on Turo would find their grandmother's car and their cousin's car, and they would put all these cars onto Turo, and people like, I can ride my bike for 2 weeks. Like if I'm going to get $500 a night for my, my 6-year-old car, great. So these people got a windfall by renting out their cars. And that was also very efficient because there were no cars. People wanted cars. And so there were cars sitting in people's driveways that weren't really needed. And those cars were able to get into the hands of the renters. So it allows the supply and demand signals to kind of meet, and it allows the supply to come on when it's needed. Like if there's a big event, somebody might go on vacation and rent out their house on Airbnb. And, it's more valuable to the person coming for the event than it is to you for that week. So there's a lot of these gains from trade that can happen through these marketplaces. And I think those are some of the promises of it. So it's using underutilized resources, allowing supply to flex in times of big demand and expand and serve more people, and then allowing entrepreneurs to be more efficient, more effective, manage their calendars, manage their payments, manage their scheduling so that they can spend their time providing their services and not wasting their time doing things that are hard for them.
Well, Professor Athey, you've addressed a wide range of issues today, and it's been to our benefit. Many, many thanks to you, and also thanks to the Marjorie Dean Foundation for supporting this lecture program. And so good day to all of you, and thanks again.
Thanks for the great questions, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.